Good morning, everyone. Hi, my name's TJ Mannix. I traveled in Cast B 1991, and I'll be your host for today. Thank you to all of us that are joining us, for all of you for joining us. Coffee. We have people joining us in the audience right now from all over the world, alumni from a number of different decades. Today, we're going to be wrapping up our 3-week series about race on the road. And we have 5 guests who are from across 5 decades of Up With People, alumni who are out there doing the work. And they're going to have, they're going to share their advice, their wisdom, their professional opinions. And today is all about allyship. So that's about, what do you say at Thanksgiving dinner? What do you say to your cast members? How are you supposed to talk about race when it's something that a lot of us didn't grow up talking about, and some of us aren't comfortable talking about, and some of our casts didn't even talk about? So this program is run completely by volunteers. Within the last couple of months, a lot of us saw a blow up among the alumni that we turned to fighting more than debating, that we turned to insulting each other, and definitely not listening to each other. So thanks to some of the volunteers on the Up With People International Alumni Association Board of Governors, they created and came up with an idea, which then Donalda McCarthy from Cast B 91 took the ball and ran with it. We're giving alumni the opportunity to talk and giving other alumni the opportunity to listen. We're giving people the chance to talk freely without being interrupted, without having it turn into a debate. Debate actually has its place. I know the Alumni Association is looking for something to do where we can get back to having an open space where people can go at it with intellectual conversation. Here, during this program, we want to give these alumni the chance to talk freely and share what they know and take it back to when we were on the road and we were listening to each other and we were paying attention to what was happening and absorbing information. Today, as I said, I'm here to listen, and I hope that you are too. If you have any questions in the second half of our session this morning, we will be answering questions from the audience. So if you can go down, there's a button that says Q&A down at the bottom of your screen. And on that button, just make sure if you submit a question, tell us what your name is and what cast you traveled in and where you're coming from, just like you had to do during staging. You may notice that you don't see yourself. That's because this is a webinar for Zoom. It's a little bit different than the average Zoom conversation with your relatives. So you don't have to worry about your own hair and makeup. You're not going to necessarily appear on screen right now. You'll see me and you'll see our panelists and our moderator, but you don't have to worry about being on screen. And if you do have any questions, you can feel free to put them in the Q&A. So to begin with, as I said, we have people that are here from across 5 decades of Up With People. And I thought best way to start is with some of our original cast members. So we started with our first cast A and B, and we have some of our friends here from Cast C's original cast. So I first want to welcome Dr. Frank Malaret. And Frank traveled in the original Cast C, the very first one in 1967. And then he came back as a cast director in 1976, Cast B, for the bicentennial shows. Now, Frank, if you can go ahead and turn on your camera. Frank, I have a question for you. I have been hearing about these bicentennial shows for years and years. And I know that this was this massive thing that happened. I know some of our younger alumni might not even understand how important the bicentennial was in the United States, but what did you do with these bicentennial casts?
Well, basically, we still had cast A, B, and C, but the cast were organized in a way that we could then break up into smaller casts. So each A, B, and C had A1, A2, A3, and so it was the same thing with all the other casts. I was in cast B2, 3, one of the two. And basically what would happen is, say that we go to a state like New York, and there were shows all over the state that the smaller cast could put on. So we would split, each little group or smaller cast would go off in its own direction. And at the end of the tour in that particular state, we usually came together in one central city. And then we put on a large show with the whole cast together. That allowed us to cover a lot more territory during the bicentennial.
And Frank, thanks for being here. I know that you're coming to us from Sacramento, California, so it is an early morning. Frank started his career in the airline industry, Go Eastern Airlines. I remember it. He has his PhD in US and Latin American history and has taught at Cal State, UC Davis, and Sacramento City College. And he's a retired Dean of Behavioral and Social Sciences, where he was for 12 years. So thank you, Dr. Frank, for joining us. And we have one of your friends. We have two people from that original Cast C. So I also wanted to welcome Keith Frohreich. So Keith, hi there. Keith is also original generation of Up With People. He helped to found the Up With People International Alumni Association in the 1980s. He's a former UWPIAA president, and no one on that organization is paid, so he has been volunteering his time to Up With People for decades. He is also a US Army veteran. He was vice president of marketing for American restaurants like Carl's Jr. and Denny's, and a senior executive on the McDonald's, Carl's Jr. and Domino's Pizza accounts, all things that over the past month I have taken great advantage of whenever I needed comfort food. And spurred to action by what happened with George Floyd, he took it upon himself to launch a Zoom and one-on-one listening sessions for the alumni from his generation. He started the Facebook page Rise Up 1965 and 1970 Up With People alumni, and their sole purpose is to be actively anti-racist. He also works with the Does It Really Matter group and Safe Harbor groups. I can't imagine what it was like in the room when you made the decision that we needed a separate group, separate from Up With People, that just was for the alumni, when we realized how many tens of thousands of us there were outside of the group. Were you there when those initial discussions happened?
I was following them and would occasionally post something, trying to be as civil as possible. I was actually one of those people that was encouraging people to stay and engage. But I understand why the Board of Governors chose the path they've now chosen. I get it. And it was tough to read some of those postings. And so many of them I didn't know, people I didn't know, I just knew that they were alums. So yes, that, the motivation to start the own Facebook page came from, I don't want to take too much time on this right now, but it came from, I just started picking up the phone and calling Black alums, okay? And most of the ones that I knew were from the first era. But then I also talked to Pat Murphy, he's almost part of the first era. I talked to Leonard Joseph, who was part of 84. Stacy Mercier is part of 84. I talked to Beya Razul, who's traveled more recently. And I picked up the phone and I says, okay, I don't want to talk about alumni I want to talk about race. And I want to listen to you. I want you to tell me your stories. And so from that grew the idea to start the Zoom meetings, decided to focus on the 65 to 70 because we kind of knew each other and felt safe. So that I think was the right decision to do. From the Zoom sessions then became the idea, well, what can we do? Well, let's at least start our own Facebook page where we can talk freely and share more focused conversation on what the mission is that we were about. One minor clarification, TJ, you're very young, you wouldn't know this. Cassie actually started in 66.
It did.
and I was one of the first members of that cast, founding member of that
I
cast.
didn't start until 68. So, okay. Sorry, I didn't start until 68. So,
yes. And so Frank, Frank joined, I think, in early '67, if I remember correctly. Anyway, so just a minor clarification.
No, it's great. And so I know that you've said that you two are great friends. I'm glad to have both of you here. I want to jump ahead to one of our youngest panelists right now, coming to us from Sandys Parish on the Petite Island of Bermuda. Michaela Joy traveled in 2017, Cast A. And right now she's attending the University of British Columbia in Canada, but studying remotely from Bermuda because that's what the world is right now, majoring in psychology and theater design and production. And she has been out there giving back to her community already as a resident assistant. She's the founding vice president of the UBC Black Student Union there, working on racial issues within a group called the Fine Arts for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. Also the director of marketing for HOPE, the humanitarian organization for providing empowerment. So welcome, Michaela from Bermuda.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for
So-
that great introduction.
Oh, no, thank you. I wanted to know if you could tell us something about HOPE, about the group that you're working with. I know it's a nonprofit that's trying to support marginalized communities.
So yeah, HOPE, the humanitarian organization for providing empowerment, is currently based in Vancouver, BC, but we're hoping to expand that later this year. We do workshops with students trying to educate them on different paths they can take after they graduate. We help them through university applications, help them get in contact with different trade schools, and then we take money that we earn from our different fundraisers and events, and we help use that to help the marginalized communities in what's called the Downtown East Side community. So these are people experiencing homelessness. So last night we actually had what we call the Covenant House Sleepout, where
Yes.
slept outside to try to raise money for youth experiencing homelessness.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for being. And Michaela, did you travel for 6 months or longer than that?
I just traveled for 6 months. I probably
Yeah.
have the least other people experience out of everyone here.
That's okay. I'm sure you fit a whole lot into those 6 months because now within the program, people have the option of traveling for 6 months or for an additional 6 months after that. So welcome, Michaela. I want to go back to the 70s now, and I want to welcome Dr. Dan Sanders. Dr. Sanders traveled in 1970, Cast B. He's here from Akron, Ohio, and he has a PhD in counseling psychology. Dr. Sanders has done so much around the state of Ohio. He's worked in community mental health as a community mental health clinician, in the state psychiatric hospital as a clinical program administrator, a university professor. He was also training director and the county mental health administrator, correctional psychologist for the Ohio Parole Authority, chief psychologist at the Super Maximum Ohio State Penitentiary, and continues to operate his own private practice, Pathways Counseling and Psychological Services. And Dr. Dan, first of all, I have to ask, is the Goodyear blimp still based in Akron?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay.
It's not the only blimp hangar in the United States, but it's the principal location. And yeah, we see it, flying around on a regular basis. Yes.
And you toured with the Pan Am casts, is that correct?
That's right. Boeing was launching their 747 jumbo jet, and they wanted to kind of create kind of a festive, entry onto the plane. So there are about 6 of us, and there were 3 at that time, 3 distinct groups. My group worked the Northern European route, England, France, Germany, and we would be at the gate, singing our songs as people got on board the plane. It was quite an experience, and coming from Cast B, which we were obviously a full cast, down to the skeleton crew was quite a shift for us, but we enjoyed our time.
It's too bad they didn't have frequent flyer miles back then, because you would have racked up quite a few. Thank you, Dr. Dan. And we have one more member of our panel. I'm very excited to have, all the way from Walnut Creek in California, also an early riser. This is Karen Lyons, who traveled in Cast C 1984.
Good morning.
Good morning, and very early morning for you. Now, Karen was also, she was a tour director in both Tucson and Broomfield, which is when operations moved to Colorado. She has her master's in public health and is a director of the Workforce Health Consulting Group at Kaiser Permanente in the Bay Area. She works in the health system in California and works with all facets of well-being and looking at the holistic picture of allyship. And I know that your passion, one of the things that you spend your volunteer time with is training in human trafficking prevention, and specifically the exploitation of girls and young women. And I know that that is a passion of yours, and my hat is off to you. How are you involved with those organizations, with your work with human trafficking? And is there anything that you would want to necessarily plug so people that are watching can go online and get more information about it?
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for asking that. And I have to tell you that it's really an honor to be here and be introduced to everybody, because I mean, there are people that dedicate their lives and their world to allyship. So it was a real honor to be asked. So thanks. But about trafficking, I first became aware of the prevalence of the problem getting my master's in public health. And I went back to school much later in life to get my master's in public health, actually in the last 10 years. And it's pretty shocking that it's all around us. There's a belief system, especially I think in California, that human trafficking and victims of sexual human trafficking are from other countries, but it's right around us. And so I think it's important for us to know that it's in all of our communities. And if you think your community's immune from it, it's just not the case. And I had the privilege of working with an organization called MISSY in Oakland, California, and it became very aware to me through the training that we go through that girls of color are real victims of human trafficking. And if you Google human trafficking in your area, you will come up with efforts. There's a lot of efforts, but unfortunately, our society turns a blind eye to most of what's happening. There's big money in human trafficking.
Yeah. Thank you, Karen.
Sure.
And thank you, all of you. I'm honored to be here with all of you for the contributions that you have all made and your continued commitment to allyship. I want to welcome now our moderators. So we have one person joining us who did not travel enough with people. So he's going to have a pretty unique perspective. Those of you that were here for the last 2 weeks, when we talked to men of color who about their experiences on the road, and when we talked about the immigrant experience in Europe. Welcome Will Jones. Will is from Denver, Colorado. Yes, that is an Emmy Award over his left shoulder. He's an Emmy Award winning journalist. He's also an award-winning public relations and broadcast professional. He has more than 2 decades of experience in public relations, marketing, and on-air broadcast experience. He currently serves as the Director of External Communications for Denver Public Schools. So he handles all facets of external communication for what is the fastest growing urban school district in the United States in terms of enrollment. He has more than 200 schools and 92,000 students that he deals with. And he's the primary spokesperson for the entire school district. He's also been an external communications manager for the University of Denver and a news anchor. Will, welcome.
Thank you, TJ. I love every one of these sessions. I'm so excited to be a part of this conversation. I've been a fan of Up With People since the late 80s, when a member of your cast came to my high school in Asheville, North Carolina. And it's amazing to me the great work that you all have done. I'm anxious for Up With People to get back on the road, because there's healing needed across the world. I'm thinking that Up With People should be a big part of that. And I'm hopeful that after these discussions and after COVID-19 is under control, you all can get back to the great work of making the world a better place. But I did want to start this conversation with our youngest member of the group, Michaela. And the reason I wanted to start with you is that the word allyship, it hasn't been around a long time. And I was just wondering if you could share from your perspective, what is allyship? What does allyship mean to you?
Absolutely. I think it's something that, for me, the definition keeps on growing and adapting as I'm, I guess, learning how to be a better ally. I view it as the willingness to actively put aside your own level of comfort to support and listen to members of marginalized groups. And I think it's important, that listening aspect, because there are times where people claiming to be allies attempt to do what they think these marginalized groups need instead of actually listening and learning to support them in the way that they need to be supported.
Now, when you were traveling with people, did you have any expectations of how allyship would be, I guess, displayed amongst the cast? And if so, did your expectations meet up to your experiences?
I think, for context, I had just graduated from a high school where we had 196 students from 95 countries. So for me, like, allyship and multiculturalism was my life. And I think it was I think I was expecting a similar level when I went into my cast, and it wasn't quite there. The discussions weren't really kind of that you just all kind of knew how to be allies without actually being discussed frequently. Like, it might come up once or twice and it might be a kind of like dip your toe in conversation, but it wasn't the continual learning process that I expected.
So Michaela, with all of your passion for this work, did you ever try to have some of those tough conversations? Did you feel comfortable enough going to your castmates and talking about allyship? Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I think her screen has frozen.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess that's island life. We'll wait for
She's back.
Michaela, are you there? Okay, I do believe she is frozen. I would like to go to Mr. Michaela, are you still, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Sorry about that. I just connected to my hotspot instead of my Wi-Fi. Rita's Wi-Fi
No.
goes out if it's too windy.
Oh, no worries. No, my question to you was, with all the passion that you have for this work, all the energy that you're putting out there right now, when you were on tour and with your castmates, did you try to have some conversations about this, about allyship?
There was a few people I could have conversations with, like in smaller groups, but it also became apparent that it was thought that I was talking too much. People told me that I should give others more opportunities to speak. And so that was kind of the end of that for me.
Wow, that's unfortunate that you had that experience. I did want to reach over to one of our elder statesmen, Mr. Frohreich, back to the term allyship. It's relatively new. Back in the day, back in the late 60s, was allyship, or I know the concept was there, but what did you all refer to it as?
I don't think we had a term for it. I think that in the first era, people would travel 1, 2, 3 years, and they might move from one cast to another. And there was much more international shows and going on and visiting Europe and South America, Asia, those kinds of things going on. And I think that, to take off on something that she was talking about, is that we didn't talk about this. We were kind of in a bubble, and our days were really, really full. We weren't there to go on tours or look at anything or listening to guest speakers about the area. We were given 4 to 5 assemblies a day to promote the show that night. And we were just constantly moving and performing. But it was one big family. It really was. I mean, we just didn't think about it. I mean, when I grew up on a farm in very white northern Indiana, and a year later I'm sharing a double bed with a Black student. You just take it in stride. you know, that's just the way it was. And it was kind of magical that way, but it was a bubble. So we were allied, but we didn't talk about it. Nothing, I don't remember it ever coming up in a green room. When we were on the buses, we were just so dog tired, we were sleeping. So it was a missed opportunity looking backward, and I've tried to now go back and try to make up for that.
Well, Keith, one question I wanted to ask you about was this effort that you're doing now later in life. It sounds like you've had this fire burning inside you, but now you're letting that flame out now. Talk to us a little bit about your experience going, or I guess, being an ally later in life.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a writer, and I blog now and then on medium.com. And after the George Floyd killing, I think that was kind of the tipping point for me. It wasn't that I wasn't paying attention to other things that had been going on in some of the shootings. I was, but that was a tipping point. And I really started to really go inside myself. And I wrote a blog that I titled, "Was I a Closet White Racist?" And it's a provocative title on purpose. But the point in being there was I saying, well, if in my heart I'm not a racist, but also if I'm not doing anything proactively to counter it, then am I any better than a racist? Because as someone said, silence is violence. Minimally, it's consent. And so I thought about that long and hard. And that's when I began making the calls. I mean, we're blessed as alumni that if you have trouble like going down the street a block away and talking to a Black neighbor, because you're not quite sure how to do that or approach them, you have alumni friends, okay? And they're happy to talk and have and listen to your questions. And so I learned that to be the case when I said, when we did the first Zoom sessions, I said, here's how we're gonna do it. We have 4 Black alum guests who are our panel. And I'm turning the Zoom over to them, and I'm not putting a clock on any of them. And I'm asking them to speak their truth. And I said, I knew what their truth was because they had already told me on the phone. And they did. They spoke their truth. And when they were done, there were tears. Because people were saying, you know, I had no idea. I've known you all these years. And I said, I don't want you to talk about time on the road unless you have some bad experience that relates to this issue. I want to know what your life was like before, and I want to know what your life is like it's been as it relates to racism. And they had stories. And so that was very cathartic. And we had 3 of those sessions. We've had 3 since. We got 2 more coming up next Saturday because people want to talk about the election. But that's how we started it. And that was sort of my evolution. And so I just said, you know, I'm in my early 70s. I don't know how many years I have left, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life. My primary objective, other than my family, is to be an advocate for anti-racism.
Well, thank you, Mr. Frohreich. I'd like to stay in that era and turn to Dr. Malaret. You know, building on what Keith was saying, I was just wondering, from an allyship point of view, in your experiences, how does allyship differ in the workplace, in personal life, and in academia?
Yeah, actually, you know, when I was asked to join, and I had to look up what allyship meant, and because like Keith said, you know, there's something that did not exist and there's no word for it. Now, in terms of my personal career, and I feel like I've had 2 lives. I worked with the airlines, and where I became an airline executive for Eastern Airlines, now defunct, and then transitioned over to academia. I consider myself to have been very lucky in as much as both in my airline job and then moving on to academia, I was always in an environment that was fairly, I'll just use the word, loosely liberal. That is to say that there was a lot of inclusion of people of all sorts of races and backgrounds. But in terms of academia, to be more specific about your question, we didn't have any such thing as allyship, but as far back as I can remember, certainly we had internships for underrepresented folks. And in the college where I eventually became dean here in Sacramento, in fact, the chancellor's office had an internship that was offered to upcoming scholars in whatever field that belonged to what we consider underrepresented groups. And that was, people of color, women, and they were brought on and paid a small stipend to become interns for professors in their particular fields. And then they were encouraged to apply for positions and whenever they became open, or to work for the colleges as part-time professors. And so they could get more experience and be in a better position to get a full-time position when they did come open. So we had that kind of mentorship going. Later on as dean, I also worked with a number of projects. The one that comes to mind that was the most significant to me was that I helped put together a grant proposal that was funded by the federal government as what we call an HSI grant, Hispanic Serving Institution grants, because my particular campus had a significant number of Latino students. And so we were able to create programs, again, to provide support to not just Latinos, because it was open really to anybody from whatever race, but it was focused on Latinos to help them with the process of registering, help them with providing counseling whenever they needed it, providing tutors, et cetera, and also broadening their horizons by providing certain experiences. One of the things that we tried to do was to provide them a study abroad semester. And that was very successful. We got a $3 million grant from the federal government to do that. And to the best of my knowledge, it still continues to this day. So in the context of academia, that's the kind of stuff that we did and continue doing. We have also, in the absence of affirmative action, created programs based on what we call equity. And that is to say that we try to make sure in every aspect of academia that we provide the support and the opportunities that can be made available to underrepresented groups. And to do it so that it's done in an even playing field, to provide those that, for example, come from high schools that may not have as much funding in their district because of the way that we fund our schools, which don't get me going on that one, but that we provided the services that those students that came from those lesser funded districts to help them enter a college, and that's the kind of stuff that we did in terms of allyships, and it's an effort that continues to this day, very much alive.
Well, thank you, Dr. Malaret. Speaking of equity, I know equity in the workplace is a big thing. That's one of the reasons I'm glad Karen is here. Karen, when you're working on creating psychologically safe workplaces, how does allyship fit into that? How does that fit into your efforts, your work to make sure that everyone feels accepted?
I think it's about belonging. We spend a great deal of our life at the office, or we used to. And do people feel like they belong? And what can you do about that as leaders to make sure that that inclusion is happening? But to get more specific, I would say So in my role, I work with employers who are customers of my company. They buy health insurance for their employees. And so my job is we work with them in helping build a culture of health. A lot of examples that I like to share is what my organization does, and I'm very proud to work for Kaiser Permanente. We're a very large healthcare plan. We have 220,000 employees, and we're headquartered in Oakland and throughout different regions of the country. And diversity and inclusion, it starts at the top in terms of we have a chief executive officer. Our company is doing that, chief officer of diversity and inclusion, and we've always had it topics as part of our training. We have a champion network, but I mean, allyship and creating that is ongoing. It's not a one and done training. And after the killing of George Floyd, my company realized they needed to talk to our employees of color, and were they equipped to do that? And they felt like they weren't. And so they hired outside company to come talk, to lead this work in listening sessions. And I think it was Michaela who used the word listening, and that's such an important part of allyship, is listening. And it was putting a mirror up in front of ourselves as a company to hear some hard feedback about racial injustice that some people felt in their jobs at Kaiser Permanente, despite our accolades that we receive as an organization in diversity and inclusion. So it kind of upped what we do in terms of creating that culture of belonging. And it's known, it's an ongoing process. And I think creating that culture of belonging, make sure you start at the top, but then it goes down to management and down to the individual employee.
Hey, Karen, without revealing any, I guess, industry secrets, have any suggestions for how individuals, how companies, we have business leaders that are probably watching this, folks do now as far as this allyship work when so many of us are stuck at home, when so many of us are social distancing? How can this work continue? Because COVID-19 is with us and we're having to work.
Absolutely. I haven't been to my office since March in Oakland. What you're doing right now is a great example of how that can be fostered. That's how we do our work now. And that's how all of us at my organization, except for the caregivers in the hospitals, that's how we all do our work, is in this fashion. I mean, when this session was introduced, Keith talked about, it's a listening session, or TJ did, and that's how it was accomplished. That's how it was accomplished when I'm talking about these listening sessions and huge town halls we do. That's how it was done. And I feel very strongly about it has to be done by the right people that have the knowledge, people that have lived these experiences, because I've seen it go badly too when it's not done correctly.
Thank you, Karen.
Sure.
Dr. Sanders, I wanted to bring you into the conversation because I know you're deep into this work. Can you talk about the evolution of allyship as you've seen it, both as a person and as a professional?
Sure. As with everyone else, when I was coming along with Up With People and prior, the term allyship did not exist. Even the concept was not really operationalized. I will say this, that I do recall, as I was thinking back on this, that in our Black community, there were white persons who we considered to be supportive of the Black community. And the term we would simply say, well, he's a cool white guy. Okay. And that was code for, yes, this is someone who was not skittish about being involved with Black people. So there was that. And then on the flip side of that was, as you know, within the Black community, again, this is a more modern term, but what we understood to be was the use of code switch, which is where African Americans basically learn how to communicate with the majority population in a way that makes them feel comfortable. So in a way that would create this kind of community, if you will, with the cool white folks and the Black folks code switching so that we can feel comfortable with one another. And it went well. So I think that that still kind of goes on to some degree, that when you're going to interview with someone and we say, well, what's he like? Well, he's cool, you know, and so you know that you can be more comfortable.
Right.
So there's that kind of allyship, I guess, that's been going on over time. I would like to say that we've talked about what we can do now, but when I was a professor at Kent State, I know that we were aware of this thing called the pipeline. I served as president of the Ohio Psychological Association, and I'm also a member of the Association of Black Psychologists. And we realized that in order to get students applying to the psychology program, they had to be aware that there were minorities even in that particular field. I was involved with a group of minority professionals who went around to the grade schools and middle schools or junior high schools and met with the students. And we talked about what we did. This was often their first experience with someone in a profession that they may not be familiar with at all. So it gave them a sense of, well, maybe I can do that. Maybe I can be that. So it starts the pipeline. So they then major in undergrad and then perhaps pursue a graduate degree and on with the professional title. So you got that pipeline. The negative version of that is the pipeline from school to prison.
Right.
Where the student constantly gets negative messages about themselves. So they start to behave that way and find themselves in the criminal justice system. So the idea of a positive pipeline versus a negative pipeline, I think, is so important if you're going to see this diversity at the top. So to me, that's a more deeper form of allyship, that whether you are African American or in the majority culture, that you are looking at, even at the youngest age, are my kids being exposed to a diverse population? Am I living in a diverse neighborhood? Are my kids involved with other students who are also of a diverse background, and so on and so forth? To me, that's the kind of allyship I'd like to see continue to happen. When I travel on the road, all of the teachers, all the instructors, the leaders were not minorities. So I knew that there were times when I could not really communicate some of the concerns I would have, because I knew this person, as nice as they were, really couldn't relate or understand what issues I might be dealing with. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
No, it does. That's outstanding, Dr. Sanders. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because I know that one of the great things about allyship, one of the things that make it work, is when it's not an afterthought. It's when it's something that's actively participated in. And so I'm looking forward to the many questions that'll be coming in to us, TJ, right after our break.
Yes, well, thank you to all of our panelists. We have questions coming in from people in the audience that are watching this, and I'm really looking forward to, we have 5 great minds here, and Will and I, and I really, I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say, and directly addressing some of the questions that'll be coming in. As a teacher, I have learned during the time of COVID that you have got to give more breaks than you normally do. And before I give a break, whether I'm teaching adults or children, I chastise everyone and say, get away from your screen during these 5 minutes. So we're going to take a 5-minute break. I'm going to ask everyone to turn off your cameras, panelists, and everyone who's watching. We'll play a little music for 5 minutes, take a break, get out of your chair, go grab another coffee, and we'll see you all in 5 minutes. If you're going to ask any questions, feel free to put that information down. There's a Q&A button. Just let us know your name and what year you traveled and where you were from. Thank you so much. We'll see everyone in 5 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. Hi, my name's TJ Mannix. I'm an alum who traveled in Cast B 1991 and B92 and C93 and D94. Welcome back to our Critical Conversation series. I want to let you know a few things. This series is put together by a group of volunteers who are part of a brand new programming committee for the Up With People International Alumni Association. And just for those of you who are not aware, that is a different thing than Up With People. So you have Up With People that runs Up With People, and then you have this group of volunteers that run the organization that is the Alumni Association. Their focus has been on the growing number of alumni, and they've been the people who have been running our reunions. And they've also looked and seen that there are other needs, and there are more things that the alumni need and want and have to talk about. So you may realize that you can't see yourself on the screen right now if you're watching this, and that's because this is a Zoom webinar. So don't worry if you can't see yourself. We'll only actually be seeing our panelists today. If you have any questions, the questions are starting to come in. Just a reminder that you should let us know where you're from and what cast year you traveled in. Take it all the way back to staging, where you always have to say where you are, your name, and where you're from. This is about listening. So our panelists have been talking about their experiences with allyship and their experiences in Up With People. All of our panelists traveled in Up With People. I also wanted to welcome Donalda McCarthy. Donalda is the chairperson of the programming committee. So Donalda.
Morning, or yes, good afternoon from Florida.
Hello, Donalda from Florida. And I'm just curious why the programming committee has chosen 2 3-week sessions so far. Why allyship?
Thanks for that question, TJ. In regards to all of the listening sessions that we've had in place, it was important to also listen to those who are doing the work. With the history of allyship, when it was both public and in everyone's face this year, to when it was more private, all of our Jewish community through the 60s and the Freedom Riders, those who were in the North coming to the South after Emmett Till was dragged through the streets for whistling at a white woman. The experience of white people, and I'm speaking as an American, because that's my truth, their journey is going to be different than those of people of color. And so giving space for all people that are involved in the work, because it does take work from both sides of the aisle, if we want to use that term. It does take work from both in order to overcome and supersede the disconnect, the imbalance in the world. It's not one-sided, just like any relationship. So we have to give space to everyone to have their moment. So thanks for asking.
Thank you, Donalda. And Donalda actually she's mission control. You can't see what's in front of her, but she has multiple screens, and she's the one that's handling all the technical things that are going on, as well as making sure that we all look pretty on screen. So Will, you are our moderator and you are not an alum. Why are you here?
I am here part of, I guess I'm a fan, or do they call them stands now? I'm an Up With People stan. I've been a big fan for a long time. And as I've shared early on when I was brought in or invited to do this work, that right now the world needs Up With People. And I remember as a kid seeing a troupe come through and being blown away with all the joy and all the happiness and even seeing on The Simpsons, you know, hooray for everything. I think the world needs some of that right now. So I'm here to help expedite, in my small way, these conversations so that the healing can take place, whatever healing needs to take place amongst the alumni, and that you all can support the Up With People, the next troops that go out, and keep sharing this work. Because, you know, I feel like Commissioner Gordon in the Batman cartoons, I'm putting up my bat signal to people, because we need y'all to get back out there and make the world a better place. Light work for you all, I mean, but this is what you do. This is what you do. But one, so I did, if I may, I had a question for Keith, because both you and Michaela used the term anti-racist. And I was wondering, Keith, if you could share with our viewers, what's the difference between being not racist versus being anti-racist?
Action, and it can take the several forms. You know, we've talked about this in our when we formed the Rise Up Facebook page, and I put on there a list that I think came. I'm not sure where the list came from, but to be an anti-racist by some of these things: participating in a protest, wearing a Black Lives Matter pin, putting a Black Lives Matter bumper sticker on your car, donating money to the Black Lives Matter NAACP, things like that, standing up to people who say racist things in front of me, voting for qualified Black candidates, stopping to record traffic stops of Black men and women, doing whatever it takes, all of these and more, doing a few of these. I mean, and part of this was, and that was kind of our first step, besides listening and sharing, you know, pretty emotional things, educating ourselves in terms of Black history, Black culture, and current Black issues. To that end, one of the most consequential books I have read as an adult is a book called White Rage. And it's an academic work done by the chair of the African American Studies at Emory in Atlanta. And it's not a big book, so that's why I found it just crammed full of so much information since 1865, and about a third of the pages are footnotes. So it's very much an academic, well sorted. I highly recommend it to anybody. To that end, we put a list of 25 books up on the Facebook page that I had gleaned from printing out like 6 different recommendations of lists, and some of them were duplications, and so it just kind of put it all up together. Obviously, we're not reading all of those things at this point. I maybe might take 10 years to do it, but that educating ourselves, putting up videos on the Facebook page, putting up articles, things like that, sharing in terms of first educating ourselves. The outreach part is the tough part. In terms of what do you do and where do you go? Am I willing to get in someone's face when I see or hear something racist in front of me? It happened to us last night at dinner with great friends we've known for 50 years, liberals, both of them. And yet, so I decided to share what I was doing. And the woman came back, who we've known forever, and told a terrible story in her student teaching days, and 50 years ago in a mostly Black school, about all she could recall and think to say in response to what I said was this horrible experience that still sticks with her today, where a teacher gave a Black student a D and the mother came in and beat her up. And that was the only thing that she could say. I'm going 50 years, that's a long time, kind of stuff. Now, I didn't push back with her too much, because she could tell that was not something that I was pleased to hear. So, so that's, you know, how do we reach out? How do we push back?
And Keith, that's one of the things I was going to ask you, and then I'll let you take a moment. My question is, when you describe these efforts, it's heavy lifting.
Yeah.
And everyone doesn't like to do the heavy lifting.
No.
A lot of people want change, but
right.
When you ask them to change, that's a whole different story. Where do you find the fortitude to Or what can you say to those folks who are like, you want me to put a Black Lives Matter sign in my front
Oh
yard?
yeah. No, and
What do you-
I can't because I live in a long driveway on a cul-de-sac. If I put it up, someone would steal it. So I don't even bother with anything like that. But wearing a pin or maybe a T-shirt, yeah, I think I'm getting ready to make that move. And I live in Orange County and just kind of see what comes from it. But clearly, I put a Black Lives Matter hat on, or tried to, when I voted recently. And I actually emailed them, the group in Los Angeles, to say, what are your positions on the propositions in California, for instance? And I actually changed one of my votes because of what they said about one of the propositions. And unfortunately, Proposition 16 lost. And I thought, here was the first opportunity. Proposition 16 basically said that it's an affirmative action proposition. And basically all it says was that the state and the universities may take into consideration race and gender and sexuality in their hiring or accepting students. Just may. Didn't have to. And it still went down to defeat. Boy, was I upset. I go like one step forward, two big steps back. And so when it came time to do that, people still voted, I think, based on, well, not my family. Okay. If my family's affected, okay, and my granddaughter or my son doesn't get into UC Davis or whatever because of this, no, I'm not going to have any of that. Everything should be equal right now. Well, it isn't.
Right.
It isn't.
And
And how do you fix it unless you do some of these things? And this isn't going to change unless white people change. It just isn't.
And I know that a lot of our conversation has been America-centric, United States-centric. I did want to ask Michaela, what does allyship look like in Bermuda? What does allyship look like in Canada? Are there similarities? Are there differences? What are you seeing?
I think it's a little bit difficult for me to answer this question just because I haven't lived full-time in Bermuda since I was like 16.
Oh, okay.
And this is probably the longest I've been here in a long time.
Well, what about Canada? What's your experiences in Canada?
I think I've lived in 3 different countries full-time, and Bermuda is majority Black. Like it's about like 51% or something like that, but that is a slight majority. And then I moved to Italy where I was a very clear minority. And then I moved to Canada where I continued to be a clear minority, but in a place that claimed inclusivity. I remember when I first went there, I was like, wait, but I thought that Vancouver was one of the most diverse cities. I don't understand, like where are all the Black people? And it's also when I started learning about how I can be an ally for other marginalized communities. It's when I first started learning about Indigenous populations and how me learning about how to be a better ally for them also helps me understand what I need my friends to do in order to be good allies for me. And it's just kind of like mutual learning together. It's complicated because being an ally means that you are going to make mistakes and there is no right way to do it every single time. Like in some situations you do need to like speak up, but there are some people who like actually the best way to empower them is to be standing behind them while they're speaking out and letting them speak their truth instead of speaking over them. And it's difficult to gauge, and sometimes it takes like going to people and being like, hey, I don't know, I noticed that person just misgendered you, use the wrong pronouns for you in the future. Like, would you like me to correct them for you, or do you want to like choose who you feel comfortable sharing this information with? And it is a lot about asking questions based on the different situations you're in and knowing that just because you make a mistake doesn't mean that you're a terrible person. And if you try to explain to the person you're supposed to be supporting that you are a terrible person and then they are forced to comfort you, then you were just putting more emotional labor onto them. Often apologizing and doing this like whole big deal out of making a mistake is just exhausting for the person that you're trying to support.
Thank you, Michaela. TJ, I don't want to dominate this second half. I've got a ton of questions I want to ask.
Yes,
but
we have
the Will Jones show, so
we also have a ton of questions coming in from the audience. This one's for I'll give it this one to Karen actually. Amy Stunkel from Cast C 89. She's in Chicago. And she said, for the panelists that are not people of color, what tools, publications, and behaviors have you implemented in order to recognize your privilege and/or your implicit or unconscious bias? So there's an easy one to solve. There you go, Karen.
I think I'd like to answer that a little differently than just listing publications
Sure.
and tools, and maybe talk from experience a little. So I think it's important for me to be aware of my entire community and not just my little white lane. And so I'll use Richmond, California as an example. I bought my first condo in Richmond, California, probably about 11 more years ago. And it was what I could afford. And it was very nice. It was in a little nice enclave. But when I moved there, all of my white friends kept saying, oh my God, you're moving to such a dangerous, dangerous place. And what are you doing? And so I took it upon myself, and it was really part of my public health training, if you will, to explore the rest of the community that everybody was so afraid of. And I found I got involved. I volunteered in the community. I became a panelist on judging art that went into this incredible park that was being revitalized. It was a scary neighborhood at times, but the park itself added to the health and well-being of the community. And I fell in love with that community, and I miss it so much. And I'm not telling this to pat myself on the back. It was where I lived. It was where I paid taxes. It was where my neighbors sent their kids to school, or they didn't. And I really saw a beauty in a place that used to scare people. So I think, to answer the question, maybe scare yourself a little, and then you don't get so scared. And the same with Oakland. You know, I've worked in Oakland for 15 years. And initially, and everybody said, aren't you scared to go there? And initially I used to drive there and drive home. And then once I became aware of the trafficking situation, I thought, this is happening outside my office and I don't even know it. So I started to become aware of the community. I started to go to marches in the community and realize everybody wants a safe environment to live in. And that was my way. I do read. I've read a lot of the things that Keith has said, and I encourage the person who asked the question to do that reading. That's kind of safe. You know, get uncomfortable.
Thank you, Karen. Dr. Frank, I have a question that's come in from Jeanette from Kansas. Jeanette traveled in Cast 68, 69, and 70. And she says, what can people over 65 do to be supportive of BIPOC? And for those people that aren't familiar with terminology, the term BIPOC meaning Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So we do have a number of people here of a certain age who have this question, and not to have you answer for everyone of a certain age, Dr. Frank, do you have any advice?
Well, you know, sort of piggybacking on some of the things that Keith and Karen have talked about too. One of the things that I think is terribly important for people of our generation is to recognize the concept of white privilege. Now, I have to tell you that I am white, but I'm also a person of color in as much as I'm Puerto Rican. And so I've had experiences in life that have made me realize, you know, the fact that I'm white, despite the fact that I'm Puerto Rican, have given me some privilege. I'll tell you a little experience. When I was traveling with Upper People, I was staying with a family, and in the course of a conversation over dinner, it came out that I was Puerto Rican. And the father looked at me and said, "You're Puerto Rican?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Oh my God, but you don't look Puerto Rican." And I said, "Well, what does a Puerto Rican supposed to look like?" His answer was dark and dumb. That was a big, big moment for me when I realized the fact that, yeah, I'm a Latino and I consider myself part of a minority group, but I'm white. And that gives me privilege. The color of my skin gives me privileges. So, you know, in context of academia and where I worked, one of the things, some years back, I don't know whether any of you have heard about a program that was encouraging courageous conversations. And we brought some folks to engage our faculty across the division in what we call courageous conversations. And that was to talk about what white privilege means and what it does, and how much, you know, we carry that white privilege sort of unconsciously. Well, let me tell you that it really had to be a very courageous conversation, because a lot of people that saw themselves as very liberal suddenly had to face certain things that they didn't like to face. And it was a very difficult conversation to have. And of course, this conversation included faculty of color who began to then share with the rest of us some of their experiences. And that was very hurtful. And that was very, you know, in the same way that when Keith brought me into the conversation with some of the Black alumni, I was just blown away. And I'll admit, I was one of the ones that cried a little bit, because we heard all these experiences from people that we knew well. And it hurt to hear them talk about some of the things that they've been through in life. And I think, you know, realizing that pain is out there and that these conversations need to be had in order for us to move forward as a country is important. And, you know, it is also important to understand, and I'm putting on my historian hat, is that racism is very much embedded in the national psyche. Historically, we have been a very racist nation. We don't like to acknowledge it. We don't teach it. We teach very little in our high schools about this. And that's one of the reasons why when I started teaching college US history, I entitled my course US History, Myth and Reality. And I began to talk about some of the things that we don't like to talk about, because we have created this image of the United States as the city up on a hill, to borrow from the Puritans. And we don't want to acknowledge the fact that that city up on a hill has some very, very dark history. And so engaging in those conversations and involving yourselves as best you can in those conversations, I think can help. And I'm, you know, really grateful that Keith brought me into some of these Zoom sessions that we've had with a lot of Black alumni.
Hey, Dr. Malaret, you know, you mentioned the word tough conversations, and I can't help but look at my calendar and see that Thanksgiving's right around the corner.
Yes. Yeah.
Every time, every year, there's always tough conversations related to some of the issues we're talking about today. So not just you, but to the entire panel, do any of you have any suggestions for how we can have these conversations with our family at Thanksgiving and it not turn into a food fight or, you know, someone unfriending me on Facebook?
Hey, Dr. Dan, we have a lot of questions coming in about Thanksgiving because apparently that must be on people's minds. In particular, I had one for you. This is Deborah Lagomarcino from 68B said, as we approach the holidays and are conversing with generations older than ourselves, if a derogatory comment is made, what can we say so that we feel as if we're not silently agreeing, especially for the rest of the group or the family, and still somehow remain respectful? So it's a generational question as well. Any advice?
Well, I get this a lot because of my load. And I think that an operative term here is to steer away from you and talk about I. And so when grandma or grandpa says something, you can say, Granddad, you know, what you just said really upset me. You own it. You're not saying, Granddad, you're being a racist. That will just really provoke the situation. But to own that this is upsetting to me to hear you say that, I think is a softer way, but yet a clear statement about where you stand about that issue. Okay. Also, if you can come up with any kind of a counter narrative. For example, my friend John, okay, is this, this, and this, and I don't see that going on with him at all. So looking at your personal experiences and bringing those into the situation, it's very rare that someone can contest what you are feeling and what your experience and what your truth is, which is not the same as pushing my truth, pushing my experience onto someone else. At least that person at the table now knows that they've made at least one person at the table uncomfortable. So that would be, I think, my first line of defense. I
Dr.
would
Sanders,
like,
yes, could I follow up on that? And apologize, TJ, if you were about to ask another question, but I grew up in the southern part of America, Southern Baptist by trade, I guess. And a lot of the discussions that we have around allyship has to do with Christianity and the Bible. And I know that you have a Christian-based practice. So I was wondering, are there any tools you can share with me for having these discussions with my deep down home Bible holding Christian family members about allyship? And how do you reconcile with some of the things in the Bible versus the reality that allyship sometimes can butt heads with that?
A couple of things. First off, the Bible is Black history, okay? It took place in Africa. It wasn't until the canal was cut through that they tried to separate that part off from Africa. But when you really get into reading, you know, different passages, you realize that, hey, these are Black people, okay? People of color. So to try to, but yet we see America trying to whitewash the Bible as though all Jesus was white and those kinds of things, which is just ridiculous when you just look at the hard facts of that. And I've had even, you know, within my Black professional community saying Christianity is a white man's religion. I say, not really, not at its origins. Okay. So that truth, I think, is so important to carry with you when you're dealing with different people, that this originated within Africa. And then you've got to be talking about people of color when you do that. So that's one thing. Within my church, it's a diverse church. We have multicultural, multiracial people attending our church. And so we are always welcoming, open, you know, open toward folks who come in. We want to make them feel that they're part of our congregation. So I don't think that being a Christian puts you at odds with the Black Lives Matter issue. So I'm not sure if I'm getting at what you're looking for, but I think that you need to also share that with your white brethren, white Christians, about if they try to say that somehow Black people are the curse of the earth, say no. If you, I'm getting worked up, but
No, I didn't want to.
we have a couple members of our church that are Ghanaian, and they don't see themselves as Black. We're African. So the whole racial distinction of Black, white only occurred in this country as a part of the slavery issue. Prior to that, it was just you were Italian, you were Greek, you were you were German, only in our country, in order to lock in slavery, did we make this divide of white, black. Okay, white is not a culture. It's an artificial delineation. And so people, I think, need to understand that this is not an original by fact-based category of people, of the white black sort of thing. So
no, you answered my question, Dr. Sanders. Thank you so much for that. I'll use some of that. I'll try to use some of that. The good thing is that Thanksgiving this year will be a Zoom, so I can make my own sweet potato pie and macaroni and cheese and not worry about it being taken away. But thank you.
This is an excellent book. It's not okay, but I think it really goes through a lot of what we're talking about in terms of the origin of Christianity and how it has been twisted through time. Because yes, they did use the Bible to reinforce the slavery. So this, I think, can be a nice piece for you to look at. While I'm on the subject, I think the book to be read right now is Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. If you have not picked that up, you have to, because she explains that caste is the bones, racism is the skin. So that you realize that the core of this notion of the dominant culture keeping the minority in submission is not unique to the United States. So pick up Isabel's book, and that's something else you can share at Thanksgiving time, what you've been reading there. And it might, I think, do a lot of things for your gathering.
Thank you, Dr. Sanders. More questions, TJ?
Yes, absolutely. We probably could keep going for a really long time. We have a number of questions coming in. I have one for Michaela. And this has to deal with, can a BIPOC person, can a person of color, can they teach a white person how to be anti-racist or an ally, and should that be their duty? As somebody who's been on a very difficult and mind-blowing and ego-shattering journey of trying to be more understanding of what it is to be anti-racist, I know that this is information that people need to hear. And so
I think it's important that unless it is their job and you're paying them for it, it's not their job. If your friend is taking the time to explain something to you, then that's just them doing you a kindness. It doesn't mean that they owe you that explanation every time. It doesn't mean that they have the emotional capacity to do that every time. You having Black friends does not automatically mean that you are anti-racist. That's a very important thing to consider. I think something that I always appreciate, because I think because so much of my work, like within the organization that I started for BIPOC, which is consulting with the theater industry on how to be more inclusive in BC. And part of my work with that is explaining to non-POC how to be a better ally and explaining my experiences. But I ask my friends to just like send me a quick warning, like be like, hey, when you have the time, if you are able to, could you explain this to me? Or point me in a direction where I can find it. But if not, you don't have to respond, no worries. I think like giving that little disclaimer at the beginning makes a huge world of difference, because it could be that like I have spent like hours in meetings explaining why it is important that people in my department not call me the other one, referring to me as one of two Black students. And that means that I'm not quite able to communicate with someone else about something else because I've already like reached my emotional capacity. I've reached my emotional limit. So setting that expectation that you understand that this is not their job and that they don't have to respond is very important for maintaining the mental health of your BIPOC friends. Yeah.
And if anyone else, if any of the other BIPOC members of the panel had something to add to that. I know Michaela, I think, summed things up rather beautifully. Unfortunately, Donalda, who was in mission control, has been that person for me, and it's taught me a great deal about my needs don't mean, just because I need an answer and I'm passionate about it, doesn't mean that my friends of color, that it's their responsibility to do the research and deal with my guilt and deal with everything else that comes with it, that's my stuff I have to deal with.
Google is a great resource.
Thank you, Michaela. And we also have, sorry, Bonnie Knight, who traveled in 69B, has a question. And I think this is, yeah, Bonnie may have, I think Dan knows everybody. And I'm sorry, I have there are so many questions here. But Bonnie's question deals with, how do you turn allyship into action? And I think I may go back to Keith on this one. Keith, how do we do that? How do we put it into play day to day? And there are a number of questions that are about this. Vicki Adams, who traveled in the 60s and 70s in the Pan Am group from Tarpon Springs, Florida, also said, when I traveled, I didn't realize an underlying racist theme. And as Keith said, I realized we were in a bubble. Looking back, I feel I was protected and cushioned, even though it may have been unintentional. How are these panelists working on inclusion in their day-to-day lives now?
Well, to me, it's a process. And as I said, part of our first steps are education. But something I wrote recently, education breeds knowledge and familiarity. Familiarity breeds connectivity. Connectivity breeds friendships. Friendship breeds trust. Trust breeds equality. Equality breeds a fairer life for us all. So that it's a continuum, and it kind of starts with self-awareness. And I agree with what she said about it's on us. Okay, it's not on our Black friends. But we're fortunate in the Alumni Association to have Black cast members, okay, and Black alums who we know. And if you create a safe place for them, they will speak their truth, and you can learn from that and listen from that. And they'll help guide you in terms of some ideas, like Leonard Joseph did for me. He gave me the idea of the Zoom sessions. And I said, well, I can do that. And so I did it. But it's a process. I mean, I live in a county that has 2% Black. So there aren't too many opportunities here. I don't have any Black neighbors, I'll confess, more Asian. That's just kind of the place I'm in. So I'm working through working with what I have and I know now, which is the Black alum friendships. And they're educating me, and I've made it a commitment that I'm going to talk to all of them people on my list at least 4 times a year. And I'm literally checking it off. And there's a couple people I've talked, Hazel Robinson, who traveled in the 60s, Pat Murphy, even Leonard Joseph. We've talked for hours. And I'm learning something every time. I mean, I'm making notes with Dr. Sanders and things that he said, code switch, pipeline. These are terms of, the Bible is Black history. I'm now learning. I'm learning from listening to you people talk. And so my avenues to reach out, I mean, I'll be candid with you. I'd like to actually divorce my extended family. I'll be candid about that. I don't try. I'll be honest. I don't try because I know them so well. It's like I got to put my energy where I think I'm going to have some kinship with people and allies and work with them. If there are several groups of white people, I made a list of them, but the closeted, quiet, well-intended ones, I think I'm willing to spend some energy on them, okay, to try to get them to draw them out. I'm willing, but I'm not going to spend any energy on hardcore racists. I'm not going to spend any energy on the group that I call shut up and dribble. I'm not going to spend any energy on those people. I don't have that time in my life. So I don't have an answer, but it's a process. We're learning as we go along. Suddenly an idea pops up. and we share it all and things like that. So the continuum is gonna move slowly, okay? But I do think it'll move, if nothing else, generationally, it'll move. You know, the younger generation between 18 and 29 are less racist, okay? Less homophobic, all those things, that's all good. And that's gotta kind of have to move as you wade through the snake. That's a long answer to, I'm not sure I answered the question.
No, we appreciate it, because again, it's an opportunity for everyone to speak their truth, and your truth is your truth. I want to thank all of our panelists for giving up their time, for some of them especially on a very early West Coast of the United States morning. But thank you to all of you, for Keith, Dr. Frank, Michaela, Karen, Dr. Dan. Thank you for taking the time, and thank you for making the time to share what you know, to share your advice, to share your truth, to share your experiences. And I hope that everyone that's in the audience, and also this is also going to be rebroadcast, people are going to have the opportunity to see this. We'll make sure that it gets out to alumni all over the world who maybe had a soccer game right now and can't be watching. But thank you to all of you for being here, and we certainly appreciate it. So I thank all of the panelists. You're welcome to, you're now officially off duty. So thank you. You can turn off your cameras. I appreciate it very much. Thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing so much important information, and also acknowledging on a final thing Michaela said that really stands out. You're gonna make mistakes. So we're all on a journey. We make mistakes, but keep going. Thank you to all of my panelists. And now I'd like to turn to Will Jones, who's our moderator for the past 3 weeks. Will, and you will all still be here. You can all still watch, but you can turn off your cameras now. Will, you've had the opportunity over the last 3 weeks to kind of dive in deep to the Up With People alumni experience. And I wanted to, as someone who didn't travel, you've seen everything from the outside. You've been able to ask a lot of questions. You've been able to see what happens behind the scenes as well. And I wanted to turn it over to you for a moment so that you can share your experience over the past 3 weeks and month or so with these 3 sessions about Race on the Road and about Up With People in general.
Well, you know, the first thing that comes to mind, and I don't want to get emotional here, but 2020 has been tough. There have been so many situations where, as a Black American man, I felt hopeless, I felt helpless, I felt lost, I felt that nobody cares. And being a part of this work with the alumni group has been a cold drink of water in that desert. I love the fact that you all are a family. And just like every family, you're not always going to agree, but you all are willing to have the tough conversations. You're willing to talk, you're willing to listen, you're willing to agree to disagree. And it reminds me of how we should conduct ourselves as a nation, as a society, as a world family. The fact that TJ, you and I don't agree on everything 100% of the time doesn't mean I can't love you. Doesn't mean I can't have your back. Just because you think one way and I think another way doesn't mean that we're enemies. We can still be great friends and just disagree. And that's the main thing I think I've gotten out of these discussions, is listening and hearing and witnessing people not agree, but not stop loving each other because they don't agree. And it gives me hope. So I am very thankful. I hope I don't offend anyone with this phrase, but I feel this was a godsend for me, because leaving this exercise with the alumni group, I'm a much better human being. I'm in a much better state of mind now than I was when this began, because the work that you all do, as I said at the beginning of this, I've been a fan since high school. And the first time I saw Up With People, I left feeling like $1,000,000. And here we are 10, 20, couple years since that time. Being involved with Up With People has given me that same energy again. So I'm grateful for this opportunity, and want to thank everyone who's been a part of this, everyone who coordinated, all the panelists, all the people who sent in questions. Just thank you, thank you, thank you for showing me what humanity really looks like.
Will, thank you very much, because we've had a lot of conversations, and we've had difficult conversations, and we've had fun off screen while we're planning all of these things. And it's an unexpected thing that's come out of these critical conversation series, is that every time we bring in a moderator, we see ourselves in a new light, and we see ourselves from the outside. And we also have the opportunity to talk about our Up With People experience, of what it was, of what it is in 2020, and how it relates to the rest of the world. And I just wanted to thank you very much for pouring your time and your talent and your heart into the last 3 weeks. And I appreciate that you've been willing to go there and ask difficult questions of us. And I thank you very much for your contribution. It has been a pleasure having you. Thank you, Will.
Thank you, TJ. It's again, it's been my pleasure to be able to listen to and talk to the world. And I'm going to share as many of these videos with as many of my friends as I can, to let them know that Up With People is still there. Up With People is still full of good people. The world is still full of good people. And I think folks just need to be reminded of this. You know, I hope that COVID-19 allows your casts to get back on the road and continue to share this great news, because I think the patient can be healed. I think we as humans can get back to civility. And I think that Up With People will be a big part of that work. And I'm proud to be able to tell folks that the next time Up With People is out, I can say, you know, I worked with their alumni group, you know.
And when we're able to travel again, we'll meet up for a bourbon, and I will get to take a picture with your Emmy. For those of you from outside the United States, that's the award for that. That's a television award that actors get, but also journalists. Will, thank you very much. For everyone who's watching, we're not done. We've made a commitment to continue these conversations, and the next round that we have definitely planned, starting on November 28th, after we all survive our Thanksgiving, where we take all the tools we learned today to actually talk to our relatives who may either be inexperienced or horribly racist, depending on how we refer to those things these days. Starting November 28th, we're going to talk about identity. So we are going to start with a conversation about gender identity, which again, it's something that for some people is new, that you may not know about. And we're going to have the opportunity to talk to alumni. We're going to talk to alumni who grew up multiracial, or maybe, and also interracial adoption. So we're going to talk to alumni who grew up who maybe look different than their parents. We have a lot of ideas on the table for 2021. Please feel free to reach out to us and give us more ideas. But we know we want to talk about things like the native or the indigenous or aboriginal experience on the road with Up With People, about multiracial marriage and parenting. So I married my bus date. So we can actually talk to cast couples who are still together 5, 10, 30 years later. Talk about alumni who are involved in law enforcement all over the world. Women of color, people who stayed on stage and never gave it up and are still performing. people who found their career choice in Up With People and stayed with it and are working in a career that they were inspired by based on their time on the road. I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that I live in southern Manhattan of New York, which is the land of the Munsee Lenape tribe, and they were prominent in the early history of New York and New Jersey. They're among the First Nations of the region who met the European settlers. And I think it's important that we respect and honor the history of the people and of the place. And making an Indigenous acknowledgement like that in a public setting is I hope something that's catching on. It's something that I've learned that I think is important. I'd like to thank members of the volunteer members of the Up With People International Alumni Association that were here. Vice President Danilo De Simone, our cast reps from 1965 to 70, Debbie Lago Marciano, Heather Riley, who represents 91 to 2000, the communications chair, Matthew Seraphin, the futures chair, Zan Diner, and programs chair, Donalda McCarthy. I get to sit here and listen and talk to these amazing alumni who have so much to share. And there is a group of alumni who are putting in hours and hours and hours every week. I wanted to welcome, first of all, Charmaine Baker. Charmaine traveled in 1965, Cast A. She is from Ponca City, Oklahoma, and a member of the Ponca people and a member of the programming committee. Also welcome Barbara Lonesbury from Phoenix, Arizona, who traveled in Cast 81E. Dale Shaver is from Cast 87A from Sacramento, California. Donalda McCarthy, who is there in the control room, handling everything that's going on behind the scenes. And Martha Renette, who's from Cast C, 1991, who's here from Colorado. We're all volunteering our time. As we often try to say, as we've often said, yeah, we probably are not going to solve racism in 90 minutes. But those of us who have traveled in all of these different eras of Up With People and have gotten to know each other just through this committee are trying really hard to create opportunities for Up With People alumni to speak freely without being interrupted and to speak their truth, and for other alumni to have the opportunity to listen and learn. So a lot of changes in the world this week. I want everybody, please be good to yourselves. Realize that on a journey towards becoming anti-racist or being an ally, you are going to make big, dumb, embarrassing mistakes like I have over the last month, and that's okay. So be good to yourselves, reach out to your friends, and we will see everybody in 2 weeks when we come back and start our identity panel. Thank you from the programming committee. Thank you to everybody for
Thanks for
watching.
everyone.